state, and national level. We focus on dismantling systems that criminalize immigration and advancing immigrants' access to justice, education, and community resources. And we are going to be recording this. Yolanda, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Yolanda. I'm also a student at the NYU Immigrant Rights Clinic. Welcome.
Hi everyone. Welcome so much for tonight, for taking the time. My name is Angie. I am co-executive director at the New York State Youth Leadership Council. This is a beautiful picture of us at our recent undocumented meetup that we had last year at John Jay. We are an undocumented youth-led organization that seeks to advance immigrant justice, education justice for undocumented people here in New York. And part of our work is obviously like getting people paid and getting money. And so that's how this came to be. And our work has existed for close to 15 years now. We are always looking for volunteers and for support and students and everyone who wants to support immigrant rights. So you could check out our website at nysyllc.org or follow us on social media at NYSYLC, where we share events, resources, and other kinds of information. And I'll pass it over to Maria, who can also introduce herself.
Thank you, Angie. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria, pronoun she, hers, and I'm the community organizer at YLC. I work with the community, the students that we work with, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Angie and Maria. So this workshop, as you all may likely be aware, DACA is under threat, and hundreds of thousands of folks who are on DACA currently are at risk at losing their work authorization. In addition, there are even more undocumented folks in the United States who were never eligible for DACA or never had the opportunity to apply for DACA and have been working in the United States to support themselves and their families. Today, we are building on the experiences of many immigrants who have experience working with or without work authorization to discuss ways undocumented folks can support themselves with or without DACA. We're mostly going to be focusing on independent contracting, which is a way undocumented folks have used to work for many, many years. Our focus is going to be on options for undocumented folks, including people with DACA. So this information might not apply if you have a different type of status, for example, an F1 visa. We just want to, so we had a few questions in the RSVP that had questions about immigration status, green cards, or how to get actual work authorization. Those aren't the things we're going to focus on today. Our conversation is going to be around how undocumented people can make income with or without work authorization. As eligibility for immigration is very situation and fact specific, we can't dive into those type of conversations. We do suggest that you do an immigration screening with an experienced attorney or nonprofit organization, even if you've done one in the past. Additionally, we might not be able to answer every single question in the chat due to the limited time and the amount of stuff we're going to cover throughout, but we will be sending out an email after the workshop with the slides, with the recording, as well as answers to some of the frequently asked questions. And we hope that you can join us in the other events. So our agenda for today is understanding work authorization and how employers are required to check work authorization of employees, the legal implications of working without work authorization, some of the different options for working, and then a deep dive into independent contracting. Great. So we're going to start off with background of work authorization. So for a non-citizen or a non-green card holder to be authorized to work in the United States, the non-citizen must obtain an employment authorization document known as an EAD or a work permit. So employers are the ones who are required to verify the identity and employment authorization of individuals hired for employment by completing the I-9 form as seen on the slide at the beginning of each employment. Employers usually store these copies, and this applies to citizens and non-citizens. They occasionally ask for re-verification if the work permit expires. And we want to note that employers do not need to check the work authorization of independent contractors, unpaid volunteers, and workers who provide sporadic or intermittent services in private homes. A big reason why we're having this conversation today is for undocumented folks who do not have DACA completing an I-9 and working a traditional employee. job is not really an option. So here we're going to be talking about ways people can earn money without a work permit. And especially, and for the folks who are working as employees currently with DACA, how you can prepare yourself in the situation where DACA does end.
So first, we want to talk about some of the questions around legal implications of working without work authorization. First, there's two really important things to know. One is that it's not illegal to work without authorization. Working without a permit is not a crime. And that secondly, as Abdel said, ensuring that somebody has work authorization is the company's responsibility. It's the employer's responsibility. It's not the workers. So an employer could get in trouble for hiring someone who does not have work authorization or working with an independent contractor who they know does not have a work permit. But this is really rare. And when it does happen, the penalties are warnings and fines. And what's important for us to know is that as workers, we cannot be fined for working without authorization. However, there could still be consequences. For example, your employer could decide to let you go, for example, if they are investigated or fined because they're hiring folks, they hired somebody without work authorization. Another question that folks might have is around whether working without authorization or without a permit might have immigration impacts. Although sometimes working without authorization can impact eligibility for future immigration statuses, this is largely not the case for undocumented people. And this is because undocumented people are unfortunately limited in what types of visas they can apply for in the US. So the immigration statuses that undocumented folks can apply for when in the US don't exclude people because of working without a permit. So for example, some folks who are immediate relatives of a US citizen can get a green card, even if they are undocumented, have ever been undocumented, or if they have ever worked without authorization. Here, it's important to know, like immediate relative, it's a legal term. It doesn't mean the same thing that we might use in our personal lives. In immigration law and in this context, it means somebody whose spouse is a US citizen, or if they're unmarried and under 21 years old, that their parent is a US citizen, or that their child that is 21 years or older is a US citizen. So it's a limited term. And for example, other examples include specialized visas, like for U visas, or special immigrant juvenile visas for some minors. These are all visas that working without a permit will not impact your ability to get these visas if you fall in these scenarios. There are also visas that folks can apply for where they have to leave the US to interview at a US consulate, and this is called consular processing. Working without a permit won't prevent someone from getting those visas either. However, consular processing and these types of visas are challenging for undocumented folks because it's risky for folks to travel and try to re-enter the US because it could result in a 3 or 10-year bar of re-entry. And there are ways to get a waiver of this bar, but it really depends on your situation. As always, it's always best before you travel internationally, before you leave the US, to talk to a lawyer about the risks for your situation. And we got some questions about temporary or non-immigrant visas, for example, H-1B or student visas. So these visas are generally not an option for undocumented folks because it requires that the person has a permanent residence outside of the US. And also, it's similar to a consular processing where it usually requires somebody to leave the country to obtain a visa. So it creates these same issues that come up with traveling. So in summary, in terms of immigration impacts, in most cases, working without a permit in itself won't prevent an undocumented person from being able to get another immigration status in the future. And here we want to stress that this information is for undocumented folks only. If you have another immigration status, the consequences of working without a permit could be different for you. Additionally, for folks, there are some rules around working and taxes that we just want to flag for folks that regardless of whether or not you're working with or without a permit, you're required by law to pay taxes, and not paying taxes or reporting income could be a crime. And there are laws that prevent the tax authorities, the IRS, from sharing your information with the immigration authorities like ICE. But if one day you're applying for some kind of immigration status or relief, immigration authorities sometimes ask you to like send them your tax return. So just know that information could end up like have to be shared in the future. And secondly, you shouldn't use somebody else's social security number or make up a social security number on I-9 employment forms, which are like the forms Abdiel were just talking about, that folks use when they hire folks, or other types of forms. Doing so is a crime and could also lead to worse immigration consequences. We're not saying that to like scare folks who've done this, but we just want to let folks know about the law and the possible risks. And thirdly, it's also important to not claim to be a US citizen. This has like even more severe consequences, and it has like severe immigration consequences. It can also stop someone from being able to re-enter the US if they travel. It's also a crime. And how this might come up like in an employment sense is, for example, the I-9 form, the employment form, where employers might give you to check your work authorization. There's a question on there that asks about your immigration status, and one option is US citizen. So we definitely recommend folks not to check off US citizen, because it could trigger all these consequences. And again, we don't want to scare folks that have already done this, but we hope that this webinar can support folks in finding ways to work where they can avoid these risks. So we'll take a pause here to see if there's any questions about the things we were just talking about. The rest of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about the options for working independent contracting. So we'll get into that more later, but if there's any questions about the things we just discussed, please ask away. And there's like a Q&A function box, and folks can let us know in the chat if you're having trouble finding the Q&A box.
Yes, so if you ask the questions in the Q&A, I can read them out loud. And just a reminder that we're not covering immigration statuses or giving advice on who should apply to what. Somebody asked, what jobs can I get with just an ITIN number? And how about people using ITIN instead of the social security number?
Yeah, we can answer this question together. So yeah, you also shouldn't put your ITIN number instead of a social security number. It's similar. It can have similar consequences as making up a social security number. And in terms of what jobs can someone get with just an ITIN, so there isn't, like, you cannot fill out the I-9 employment form with just an ITIN, but we're going to talk about the next part. We're going to talk about different ways for folks who don't have social security numbers.
And then we have, if someone loses DACA status, can that social security number be used on scholarships and independent contracting?
Yeah, so your social security number is yours. You can continue to use it. For example, for independent contracting, things like that, it's still valid. You won't potentially have work authorization unless there's a different route where you get work authorization, but it's still valid. So for example, you could still use it to get a bank, to get accounts like that.
I see one question here that says creating a business when you need a license and it requires a social security number. So in New York, people who are undocumented without DACA, there's still legislation trying to be pushed so people can get certificates and licenses. So that is still being worked out basically with the state. It's still not defined.
Yeah, and we're going to be diving a lot deeper into some of these questions. with regards to different forms of options for working. So we might be answering a lot of these questions as they go.
Somebody said, if I am working with a W-2 job with someone else's social security number and get caught, will I get in trouble?
Yeah, so it's definitely a risk that if you do get caught, it definitely is a risk of getting in trouble. We definitely recommend like talking like personally with an attorney if you're concerned about it, because there could be consequences for that.
And then somebody said, for clarification, does this mean that undocumented students are ineligible for paid internships?
So what we have seen is undocumented students are eligible for internships and fellowships when funds are private or sometimes through their school with support from the New York Dream Act. Undocumented students could qualify for state or city funded opportunities. I don't know if you all want to add anything else.
There's also some of the things that we're going to be discussing today. So for example, independent contracting could be ways where, as we'll talk more, ways that these potential internships can turn into opportunities for you all. Without having to, for example, we see some of the comments mentioning like a fake SSN, as we're going to go into later, independent contracting, they're not going to know whether you have work authorization, or at least they do not need to check. So that would be kind of answer some of these questions.
I think we can continue and then stop at the next one.
I think that sounds great. And for a lot of these questions, as I mentioned, we're going to be answering them. So hopefully once the second section comes up, some of those answers are, some of those questions are answered. Great. So options for working. So these are just some of the options for working that we're going to be discussing today. So first, working as an independent contractor. So there's a few different ways, whether you're starting as an independent contractor and working for different companies or a company. Converting your current job into an independent contracting position, or turning a job offer into an independent contractor. We'll be discussing some pros and cons and why you might want to do that. Then we'll be talking about creating your own businesses, starting or joining a workers' co-op, working as an employee for a company that doesn't check work authorization, and employment visas. Great. So what is an independent contractor? So an independent contractor is not an employee. An independent contractor or freelancer is a self-employed person or entity contracted to perform work for or provide services to another business person as a non-employee. Independent contractors control their schedule, work product, who they work for, and more. So an important thing to know is employers don't have to check the work authorization of independent contractors. Thus, it's a way for people who don't have a work permit to work. Remember, working without a permit is not a crime. And for undocumented people, it is generally isn't a barrier to getting an immigration status in the future. One important thing to know is that if employer actually has knowledge, knows that the contractor or freelancer does not have work authorization, it's similar to an employee situation, so they're not supposed to work with them, and doing so might have similar consequences, such as a fine. So what are the pros and challenges of working as an independent contractor? So a pro is, as an independent contractor, you are self-employed, you're your own boss. So there's no company that needs to check your work authorization. Again, with the caveat that if they actually have knowledge that you don't have work authorization, then they would not work with you. Independent contractors have flexibility over their hours, their clients, their experiences, and their earning potential. You're free to work for multiple employers, build experience in different areas that you would wish to be and potentially make more money, and even potentially prepare you for a future in starting a business or a workers' co-op. And there's some tax deductions that you can claim. What are some challenges? So independent contractors don't have the same labor protections as employees. So some of the benefits that come with an employment relationship aren't guaranteed or provided in an independent contractor situation. So that involves like wage, overtime, paid vacation, employer health insurance. Another thing that we do want to mention is that sometimes the classification of becoming an independent contractor is more difficult than just changing your tax forms that you're signing. Sometimes, which we're going to discuss a little further today and more in our second event, you're going to have to maybe convince the company to let you do this, which could be difficult and might not work. Great. So how do you become an independent contractor? So as your self-boss, you're going to be marketing yourself as an independent contractor for a different company or companies. You're going to be able to turn your current job as an employee into an independent contractor. And we want to note that this is quite timely because currently, if you do have DACA, you have work authorization. And this is an opportunity to build yourself up as an independent contractor, especially that currently the employer has knowledge that you do have work authorization. And in the future, in the hypothetical end to DACA, there's a different, you no longer under that employer, so they won't be checking your work authorization again. And because, people's statuses change, there's not an assumption that you don't have work authorization. And the third one is turning a job offer into an independent contractor. So we're going to dive a little deep into these, but then we're going to, in our next event on April 6th at 6 p.m., we're going to have a workshop, which will be talking more about how to be an independent contractor. And we'll be discussing how to negotiate converting a job or job offer into an independent contracting. We're going to be creating space for problem solving and peer discussion about what independent contracting could look like for each of us. So we do hope you can join us. There will be an RSVP link in the chat. Yeah. So our next discussion is creating your own business. This is another option, and it's important to know that there are no federal or state laws, immigration or otherwise, that explicitly bars an undocumented immigrant from owning a business. So anyone with an I-10 or an SSN, if you are a DACA recipient, can start their own business, or an EIN, which is an employment identification number. So what are the pros for that? So you're your own boss. So no one is going to be checking your work authorization. And you have the independence and flexibility to create and grow your business how you want it. A lot of no employer is going to check or ask for your work authorization. Also, by incorporating as a business, you can hire employees. We do want to note, since you would be a business owner, you have to follow the same regulations where if you know that someone does not have work authorization, under the law, you're required to check and then not work with if you know that they don't have. Incorporating a business also creates a layer of identity and possible liability protection from the business and the personal assets. You're going to be able to potentially get access to financial capital from banks or from funds that you might not have been able to get as an independent contractor. And you can grow your client base and income more potentially than when you're an independent contractor. What are some challenges? Creating your own business, starting your own business is a financial risk, as there's often quite high startup costs, whether it's materials, business establishment, monthly obligations such as rent, and owning your own business is quite stressful and time consuming. Immigrants are 80% more likely to start businesses in the US than native born citizens, and immigrant entrepreneurs make up over 20% of all business owners in the US. A lot of immigrants are, creating their own businesses and potentially doing things that you all are interested in. There are so many resources out there to help you start your own business, whether it's choosing the business structure you want, registering the businesses, obtaining specific licenses or permits. There's a lot of opportunities YLC created a non-citizens guide to entrepreneurship that has so much information that you all should check out, as well as resources from Immigrant Rising and some New York-based government websites. So you all should check out these opportunities, as well as pro bono legal advice for small businesses. When we send out these slides, you'll be able to access all these links. So no need to like write them down right now.
Another option for folks is starting or joining a workers' co-op. So a workers' co-op, also known as a workers' cooperative, is a business where workers both collectively own and operate the business. So members invest their labor and or their money into the workers' cooperative and collectively decide how the business will run. So all members share in the profits of the business, and each employee has an equal vote and ownership over the co-op. So there usually is a membership fee for each member, but the amount of the fee is totally up to the co-op. So some pros and challenges of workers co-op is it's a way to start a business with limited resources and experience, and where you share the responsibilities and risks with others. Workers together determine working conditions, for example, like pay, hours, vacation pay, workers' benefits. That's all collectively decided with your fellow workers. And also the solidarity and community aspect. So there's community from being part of a workers co-op, from your fellow workers, and you're also become part of a network and growing movement of workers co-op in New York and beyond. Some challenges, democratic management is complicated, and time and resources are necessary to do it well, because workers co-ops involve multiple people who collectively own and operate a business. It can require more effort to start than starting a business on your own. And workers co-ops could have more administrative needs than just one person owning a business. For example, you'll have to figure out how to pay all the workers members, like collectively manage finances and collectively make management decisions. However, fortunately, there are a lot of training and resources to start and run a workers co-op, especially in New York and California. New York City specifically has a policy to support workers co-ops. So there's a lot of resources, some by the government, a lot by like nonprofits, to help people start worker co-op, to help people grow their co-op, and even there's like grants and financial funding for folks in starting and maintaining a workers co-op. So we definitely recommend folks check out this link, these resources, and just also, like, if folks are not up for starting a co-op, there's always option to join a co-op if you see one that you're interested in that is accepting new members. Like, that's always an option. It does take a little bit of research to figure out like what are the co-ops in your areas and which co-ops are accepting members. But we just want to remind folks that if you don't feel comfortable starting a co-op right now, there's always an option to join one. And we've been talking about a lot of options of ways to change the way you work, and sometimes where or how you work, or how to start working without a work permit. But we just want to remind folks that, this might not be necessary for you. You may be in a situation where you are working as an employee and you don't need to change that because your boss doesn't check work authorization. And we just want to remind folks, it's not illegal to work without a work permit, and checking work authorization is totally the employer's responsibility. So you might be in a situation where you could just continue working where you are, or you find a job where you're able to work. We, of course, like, this is not like, fail safe, this is like, there's still risks, even if like an employer did not check your permit when you started working, or did not ask you for an updated permit when your permit expired. They could ask for a valid work permit anytime, and it is a risk that you may end up losing your job if you're unable to show a permit. But we just want to flag that for folks. And we know that some folks are also thinking about employment visas. And we just want to, we won't go into depth on this in this session, but we want to flag that employment visas are a limited option for undocumented folks. And we say limited because it's, typically requires a bachelor's degree and some work experience. It can be quite expensive and time consuming, and also usually requires that the person leave the country to go through consular processing. And as we talked about a little bit towards the beginning, consular processing is risky for undocumented folks because there are these 3 or 10-year bars to re-entry that undocumented folks face. There are waivers in limited situations, and we definitely recommend talking to a lawyer about that. And so unfortunately, we can't get into depth about employment visas today, but we want to flag this is a possibility for some folks. And if you think it's an option for you, definitely consult with a lawyer experienced with employment visas. All right, we'll take another pause here for questions.
Someone asked, can independent contractors apply to companies that are contracted by other companies as a vendor, or would that not be possible if they require a social security number? So I guess they're asking, can you be a vendor to a company that's contracted to another company?
So if they're contracting out similar to like, it seems like you would be able to, because they're contracting you as an independent contractor instead of the actual company. So it seems like it's the second. So yes.
And then somebody asked, is it possible to apply to a job that isn't for independent contractors, but negotiate with the employer to make it an independent contracting position?
Yes, that is totally possible, and will be what we're going to talk about in our next part of our workshop, as well as our second event. So thank you for foreshadowing that for us.
Yeah, and just in a little bit, we're going to be doing a deep dive into independent contracting, so explaining more about who are independent contractors. So if you have questions like that, we're about to hit that as well.
If it's not illegal to work without authorization, is it illegal for employers to hire persons without authorization?
Yeah, so yes, that's right. It's not illegal to work without authorization. Employers, if an employer gets investigated and gets caught for hiring folks without authorization knowingly, as in the employer knew that the person did not have a work permit and decided to hire them, then they could get fined or warned. So there are these types of consequences for employers if they knowingly, as in they know somebody does not have a work permit and they choose to hire them.
I saw there was a question about what you need to work as an independent contractor. And I just want to uplift our entrepreneurship guide has a detailed chart of the differences of being a contractor, working in a co-op, starting a business, and a checklist of like what you would need, what paperwork you would need, how would you file your taxes. I know that when you open that PDF and you see close to 200 pages, you're like, fuck this, I'm not reading this. But you could just search like independent contractor, and then it'll take you to where you want to read. Thank you for putting it in the chat.
I think we can move on. So then, and then the next round of questions can be ending.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll have another session on questions. So if you have any questions about this particular section or any other part of the presentation, feel free to ask at the end. Great. So now we're going to be taking a deep dive into independent contracting. And as a reminder, so an independent contractor, also known as a freelancer, is a self-employed person or sometimes an entity contracted to perform work for or provide a service to another business or person as a non-employee. Again, employers don't have to check the work authorization of independent contractors, so it is a way for people who don't have a work permit to work. So how does this work? How do you start earning a living as an independent contractor? 36% of American workforce are freelancers or also known as independent contractors. These include truck drivers, riders, yoga, fitness instructor, artists, designers, construction workers, barbers, healthcare workers, real estate agents, and a lot. So one thing that we do want to know, since you will be your own boss, it's kind of a shift of mindset from when you were working for an employer. You know, now you should find your area of expertise, whether it's a service or a product, find that ways to market yourself, network, do your own taxes, but most importantly, believe in yourself. We got some great advice from Laura Pamplona from YLC in one of the Undocu series. Think about the things you are good at and how you can get people to pay you. Think about needs in your community and how you can use your skills to support those people in your community. So what are different types of independent contracting? So one is working as a professional service provider. Depending on your expertise, skills, certifications, professional and academic background, there's a lot of professional services that you can possibly provide to the public. These include, accounting, advertising, legal, medical, computer programming, photography, landscaping, construction, real estate, cosmetology, and more. We do want to note that some states do require certification or special license for some of these professions. And for most states or most people, without a status, it may be difficult to get one of these professional licenses. But there are a lot of professions that don't require licenses, such as tutors, tech support, babysitters, videography, software engineer, computer programming, graphic design, and so much more. Another way is participating in the gig economy. This includes driving for car services, whether it's Uber or Lyft, selling products or services on sites or in person, such as Etsy or Herbalife, freelance writing, web design, musicians, working for pay apps such as TaskRabbit or Walking Dogs, also potentially renting out your space in your personal homes, such as an Airbnb situation.
So there are different ways to find work as an independent contractor. One way is to look up in the independent contracting postings online. So companies will post that they're looking for an independent contractor on job posting sites like Indeed or ZipRecruiter. You can find these postings on sites where you'll find like traditional job or employment postings. You'll also there's also a site specifically dedicated for independent contractors. And there's also like other ways that people like find work, for example, like community job posting boards and places where you'll find like other opportunities. There'll be also people posting about looking for independent contractors there. So these job postings will typically include words like independent contractor, 1099, which refers to the form independent contractors fill out instead of the forms which is different from the forms that employees fill out, like contracting, flexible, and most of these jobs will typically pay by the hour. So another way to find independent contracting work, and as someone flagged earlier, is that you can find a job posting that is posted as a traditional employee job and ask if that job would work with you as an independent contractor. So this is typically done after you have an offer or when you're sure that they want to work with you. So at this point, they want to work with you because of your skills and what you bring to the company. Maybe you've had your interview, you show them your resume, they want to work with you. And now that you just have to convince them that you can do this job as an independent contractor. So note that in the hiring process, an employer cannot ask about someone's immigration status or citizenship. Sometimes employers may ask a candidate in the application, there might be a question on the form that asks if you're authorized to work in the US. So if this field isn't mandatory, you could leave it blank. It's important to not lie on that question because making a false statement about this could trigger some of the like negative consequences we talked about like lying on these types of employment forms, including immigration consequences or even like possible fines or like criminal consequences. So we just recommend folks not lie and leave it blank if you can. And employers, if evidence of work authorization is not required until after there's an accepted employment offer, like a job offer. So if you're able to negotiate like a traditional job offer into becoming an independent contractor, the employer would not need to know about whether or not you have work authorization. So in thinking about how to ask a potential like company about working with you as a contractor instead of an employee, you should mention the benefits of being an independent contractor for you and for the company. You should not talk about your immigration status or your work authorization. You should not bring these up as reasons. Instead, you should talk about the benefits of being an independent contractor and how this will benefit you and how this will benefit the company. So there's many people who work as independent contractors, as Abdel said, in a whole number of fields for a whole range of reasons. So some common reasons that folks might become an independent contractor is you're your own boss. You have control over your own work, which gives you creative control over the direction of your work. There's flexibility, and there's flexibility in your working hours, flexibility in where you work. You can work at home. You could possibly work in the office. You could do a hybrid situation. There's also tax deductions for business expenses that independent contractors can get that employees can't. This would offset your income and help lower the amount of tax you pay. And we'll talk a little bit more about like how taxes are different for independent contractors, as well as entrepreneurship guide, as well as other resources online about taxes for independent contractors. Additionally, you can experiment with different ideas and gain experience and skills to start your own business. And there's also many benefits to the company in working with you as an independent contractor. For example, they only pay you for the work you do and for the time you spend working on projects for the company. It gives them more flexibility in staffing for future projects. And for the company, they don't have to pay employment tax, like vacation pay, health insurance, or like other benefits they might provide to employees. Of course, and we'll talk about this later, like we don't want you like missing out on these benefits. So we'll talk about how you should be negotiating a higher rate to account for how you're going to have to pay for these things. But these are all things you can use as your negotiation like tactics when you're talking about with the company. And at our next event on April 6th, that's going to be in person, and we're going to have more of an opportunity to like go more in depth about how to do this and support folks in problem solving and workshopping these conversations.
Yeah. So as an independent contractor, you're self-employed. So there are going to be some additional things you need to consider and do. So for example, in taxes and forms, as well as we mentioned earlier, there's some of the benefits that you don't reap as an employee would. So independent contractors are not employees. So independent contractors are responsible to pay the portion that employers pay for the Social Security and Medicare. They have to pay that portion as well. So they pay more in taxes for Social Security and Medicare. This is like a self-employment and income tax. Again, you can file your taxes using an ITIN number. We also want to note that as an independent contractor, you don't get employer-sponsored health insurance, so you would be responsible for your own health insurance. Some of the resources that we provided, like Freelance Hub, provides like an independent contracting type health insurance, and there's other markets that you can do some research to get health insurance through. You also kind of, as Yolanda was mentioning, negotiate your own rate, and often you want to negotiate a higher rate to account for some of those things, such as paying that increase in taxes, the Social Security and Medicare that you're going to have to pay instead of the employer, as well as health insurance, as well as some benefits such as like not getting paid for vacation days.
Additionally, independent contractors have to make sure that they have a contract that sets out the terms of your work, including your pay rate, how often you'll be paid, and the expectations for your work. You'll likely also have to issue invoices to the employer in order to be paid. You can find like invoice templates online in a lot of different resources. And an independent contractor gives the company they're contracting with a W-9 form instead of using an I-9 form, which is the form we were talking about that employees fill out for work authorization. So this W-9 form requires either an ITIN or a social security number. So as we were saying a little bit earlier, if you already have a social security number, you don't need to apply for an ITIN, even if you like don't have work authorization in the future, even if you don't have DACA in the future, that social security number stays with you and you can keep using it as your social security number. It doesn't give you work authorization on its own, but it's your social security number. If you don't have a social security number, you can apply for an ITIN by filling a W-7 form on the IRS website. You can find more information or find that form on the IRS website. An ITIN is just a tax like processing number, the IRS like identification number, and they're issued to people regardless of immigration status. It can also be used to open bank accounts at some bank, and it doesn't give work authorization on its own, but you can use it to like file taxes or to fill out this W-9 forms for independent contractors. Before we get to questions, we just want to once again plug our next event where we'll be talking about how to be an independent contractor more in depth, and we'll talk about how to negotiate a job offer into independent contracting more, as well as we'll be discussing for folks who are currently working as employees with DACA, how to convert your current job into independent contracting. As well as there'll just be space to speak with other folks who have similar questions. So our next event is going to be on Thursday, April 6th. It's going to be in New York in person, and we highly advise folks to RSVP as soon as possible. This will be a closed event, confidential event. So we highly recommend folks RSVP as soon as possible. And later on, there will also be a panel event featuring folks who have experience working in the different styles that we talked about today. So please stay tuned. Please follow YLC on social media and keep an eye on their website to find out about these events when they get posted. All right, I think we're ready to open it up to questions again. This is the end of the workshop. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the question box.
And these are some resources that we all have already been discussing, but feel free to take a look at all these resources. They have a lot of great information for you all.
Okay. Is babysitting considered freelance work?
Yeah, so I mean, it basically is because you are, working for an employee, like working for someone and kind of like contracted to do that potential work. And outside of them telling you when you have to be there, you set your own work style and things like that. So it's basically a freelance job.
Although an employer isn't allowed to ask about immigration status, what should I say when the employer disregards this and asks anyway?
Yeah, that's a great question and a pretty difficult question. We do want to note that that could be like a labor violation because it could potentially be, I don't know if you would potentially say this, but just like for your knowledge, because it could be seen as like discriminating based on, national origin. If they're like assuming for some reason that you don't have status, so they should be worried just in themselves about like doing something like that. There are occasions where the employers will ask potentially like 2 questions on an application, such as do you have work authorization, as Yolanda had mentioned, or will you need a sponsor in the future? But kind of what you're mentioning with that question, we'll be having a more in-depth conversation on April 6th, sorry. So hopefully you can join us for that.
I'm seeing several questions about having more resources in other languages, and I totally agree. We are looking for more volunteers to help us translate materials, to maybe interpret and to have these similar conversations in other languages. So if that is you, please email us. But at the moment, we can only provide this information in English, and we hope to translate a frequently asked questions document into Spanish. Also, the in-person event on April 6th is prioritizing undocumented people. And we hope to talk about things that maybe we can't record and put out into the world. So that event is closed and confidential and it will not be recorded.
This event is recorded and we'll be passing that along with all the slides so you can also see all of these sources and stuff that we provided you all.
I'm seeing some questions that are about like people's specific situation, people's specific work interests, or people's education that they have, and questions about like opportunities in those fields, or how to do these types of work in those fields. So unfortunately, we can't get into those specifics today, but if you're in New York, we hope you can RSVP and come to our second event on April 6th, because that is definitely an event where we'll be able to dive deeper into people's specific situations and think about how to make income based on your interests and your education.
Are there any other questions?
There was a question about specific way to find worker co-ops. So we'll send out the slides, and there is a directory of like workers co-ops specifically in New York City, and the link is in the slides. I will say that the directory is a little old, so not all the postings in the directory, I think not all the links in the directory still work, but some of them do. And yeah, unfortunately, like also, you know, Google will hopefully also pop up some results, but hopefully that directory could be like a place to start, or at least thinking about some of the different types of work that folks are doing at workers co-ops.
Someone asked if this information is works for federal jobs.
So again, it kind of depends on what type of job. So if they're doing independent contracting work, they do the same process. So the form that you would end up filling out is something that you can fill out the ITIN number with, instead of, you know, the work authorization form that's filled out. So yes, but it would depend on if it's like an independent contracting opportunity.
I think they were asking if they can get federal like jobs, like with the government, with an ITIN number as an independent contractor.
Yeah, I think probably not. Well, not with an ITIN number, and I think also the bigger the bureaucracy, the harder it would be to do some of the things that we're talking about today. But all things we can workshop more at our next event as well.
Yeah, I think it was also similar to one of the questions before about becoming a police officer. You need citizenship for those types of jobs. Somebody asks, who is involved in the classification change in terms of stakeholders for independent contracted work will that be discussed at the next event? I think they're referencing to one of these lines.
So if you're asking who, so if a job were to be changed from an employee to an independent contractor, so that would potentially be if there's an HR department within that, you know, employer, as well as potentially like your supervisor, things like that. Like that's where like the communication would be with the supervisor or HR department. Those type of individuals would probably be making that classification change from employee to independent contractor.
Somebody said, do you offer informational events for educational opportunities for undocumented people? As YLC, we offer a community space for everyone, if students or non-students. When we offer also internships or fellowships, those are posted regardless of immigration status. But you have to be up to date with like our social media or subscribe to our newsletter on the website or check the website for when those opportunities come up.
And if you're currently an undocumented student, we are gonna be having our Undocu student meetup April 25th at Brooklyn College. And you will see us there. We will have networking opportunities, resources, and just some peer-to-peer exchanges. I saw there was a student in the questions from John Jay who just maybe would benefit from sharing with other folks about this type of stuff. So please come. You're all invited if you're in New York City. Thank you, Maria, for sharing in the chat. I also saw that there was another question about health insurance. So some undocumented people in New York City are eligible for New York City Cares. So that's one way you could get kind of limited municipal care with the disclaimer. There's a bill that's being pushed in our state called Coverage for All, which would support more folks getting health insurance regardless of status. The thing with this type of conversation is we're just learning as we go with y'all, right? We've never been in a situation where DACA ended, that we had to figure it out, or all these conversations are also new for a lot of people. So this bill would start to address some of these concerns, but unfortunately, like our state is very slow with these things, but that's one way. And so New York City Cares, the Coverage for All bill, and then there are other systems that people could pay out of pocket, like Sesame Care or Skype Psychiatrist and things like that. But of course, it could add up and be very expensive. And if you're an independent contractor, you kind of had to negotiate for a little bit of extra money so you could afford those things.
Someone asking if you can be an independent contractor as a student. So if you're still a student.
Yes, definitely.
I will say though, some of the hurdles I've seen here is young people maybe not having a robust portfolio and client list versus other independent contractors who may have a little bit more experience. So we have seen young people kind of struggle to get started when they don't have that kind of like backing.
I think, Yolanda, you can speak more about what we're gonna be doing at the next workshop, because there's some questions about that.
Yes, so at our next workshop, we'll be going more in depth about how to be an independent contractor. We'll be talking some more about how to negotiate a job offer into an independent contracting gig. And we'll also talk about for folks who are currently working as employees with DACA or without DACA, how to convert that employee, like your employment, into independent contracting. Yeah, as Angie said, like, you know, there's no like step one to like income, like, you know, it's just, these are all like tools and different strategies that we want to share with folks, that we want to workshop with folks at our next event. We'll have more opportunity to dive deep into people's like specific situation. There'll be opportunities to talk about this with peers and do some problem solving and reflection. So we're hoping to create like a safe and confidential space to dive a little deeper into this.
I saw there was a question about maybe working as a contractor or freelancer and having a hard time getting paid when you've completed the service. So Freelancers Union actually has a lot of resources and support legislation that supports freelancers and gig economy workers because a lot of people have been dealing with this. So they have a robust system to help people feel part of a union and get resources and support to get their money back and address wage theft. And also these opportunities are open to anyone regardless of status. So the impact of the pandemic is a lot more people want to work as freelancers or contractors. They want to work from home. They want more flexibility. And one benefit, I guess, from that is that you get to kind of like, you know, not have to out yourself every time as like an undocumented contractor. But yeah, check them out. They have resources on that as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for all the great questions. Thank you for participating and being here with us today. As Yolanda mentioned, we have our next event on April 6th, 6 p.m. It's going to be a great event, in person, confidential, and we're going to be going through a lot of different things that can potentially help you all. So we hope to see you there.
Thank you everyone for making the time and for coming out today on Zoom. Again, we're the New York State Youth Leadership Council. Please check us out on social media at nysylc.org or nysylc.org on our website. For information, resources, upcoming events, we have a Undocu grad guide for people who want to go to grad school, PhD programs, law school, things like that. So please look online and follow us on social media. Thank you all. We will send out more information afterwards. Bye. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.